You can still hear me okay, Eric?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool.
And then my microphone was on. Hey, Ben, I'm not seeing the PDF of the session. Can you put that in the chat of the backstage?
Yeah, I thought I attached those files.
Maybe you did to the session. Nope.
I just tried again with the PDF. Or maybe I need to like send a message with
backstage section.
Yeah, on the backstage. Yeah, there it
There
is.
you go.
I had hit the plus to attach the file, but it didn't send the file. I had to send some text with it, so that's what.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, let me put a sign on my door. we want to go ahead and get started or wait a bit?
Yeah, you can get started.
Okay. Well, my name is Eric Hansen, and with me has been Benjamin Chamness. We are from the University of Texas Tech, and today we're going to be talking about our time slotting system. So this is a system that we've been using for a few years now. We started with just a couple halls, and then have increased our usage of it for multiple halls, rolled it out to multiple halls. So we're going to be talking about time slotting in general and our particular implementation of the system to make that happen. And so I will toss it over to Ben to get us started.
Howdy, y'all. Okay, so like Eric mentioned, this is over our time slotting system, and it's a general system we've built for a variety of purposes, but we use in our movement and time slots, and that'll kind of be the focus for today, but want to give you all a little background on how else we use the system. So here's kind of an outline of what we'll talk about today. We'll have a demo of the site in these slides. We'll have talk a bit about the design of the system and how it's all put together, so that might be more for any IT folk on the call. We'll talk more about the implementation, how we actually use the system leading up towards moving, and then Eric will wrap us up with some reflections and limitations, things we've learned from the system or how we've adapted the system for our needs or those kinds of things. So we'll start off here with a demo. So, and I apologize, I don't know exactly what y'all's screen is going to look like, but there is PDFs of this with the event on the site here. So if you can't read this super well, there is a PDF over there that should be matched up with this one-to-one. So if you can see from this slide, this is kind of like what the time slotting page looks like. By default, I kind of made a simple test version for this presentation. We have the form title listed there, options for SWOG sample time slot page. Below that, we have some descriptive text that we can add for each implementation of this. So that could be like for move-in time slots, what you want students to do leading up to a move-in, what their instructions should be day of when they arrive to their halls, that kind of thing. Or describing about what the program or event they're signing up for, those kinds of things. So we have that area for some dynamic descriptions there. Below that, we then see our table of sections and options. So the options in red text are the actual links that users will select to select a given time slot. But we have the system set up so those options can be grouped by sections. And I'll talk about those more in a couple of slides. But for like move-in time slots, our sections are the days of move-in. So we see here Saturday, August 14th, Sunday, August 15th. And then following that, we have our options, which are certain time windows within that day. 8 to 9:30, 9:30, 11 is mostly taken off of what we used for fall 20. So those are the various options users can select. And we have the system set up so that each one of those options can have their own capacities. And on the right, we see all of those are set to 10. So 10 people can sign up for the Saturday 8 to 9:30 a.m. time slot. But we could have each of those be dynamic. We could maybe do more in the mornings, less around lunchtime, more in the afternoons, which we've done. I think the first year we implemented, we did that kind of thing. But those capacities are different based on whatever you need from those roles. Whenever someone selects a time slot, one of those options in red, they're shown an online form. So part of this system is powered by our mock form online form software, which a little plug for them. It's a super cheap form software, especially if you self-host it on your servers and databases. There, we have made some modifications to capture things from our sign-on system. So you can see the top two fields there are pre-populated with my name and email address from our E-Rater sign-on authentication system. The form, we also have pre-populated the option that the user had selected. And then a simple acknowledgement to agree to show up at the time. And typically, so all of our implementations of time slots are based on an online form. And we keep those forms fairly simple, usually just an acknowledgement saying, yes, I'm going to show up at that time. The reason for that is kind of twofold. Anytime someone would change their time slot, they would need to resubmit the form. So if the form is several fields long, then you'd have to recollect the data every time the form is submitted. So every time if they just move their slot, they also have to give you all that information again. Additionally, which we'll see on actually the next slide, some of our time slotting forms, if it's like volunteers for an event, we don't care about how many times people can sign up. They could do they could sign up for 100 different time slots to volunteer. We want them to possible. So we may have them select multiple. Well, then every time they select a time slot, they would have to fill out the form again. So if you're trying to collect volunteer information and then also scheduling for your event, you may want to kind of separate those two processes. Like, well, fill out our volunteer info form over here, and then here's our scheduling form. That's just an acknowledgement. So we keep this form fairly trim down on that. And yeah, mock form, M-A-C-H form, F-O-R-M. But it's fantastic. We've definitely gotten the $100 single one-time use out of it. And granted, we are able to self-host on our servers and have made edits and stuff like that. So some technical knowledge and skills there, but it's fantastic. Okay, so after the user selects their given option and get redirected back, we have this page. I guess I should also add, these pages are kind of wrapped around the mock form software, so it's separate from that form software anyway. It's not a presentation on that. So this is what users would see after they submit the form. And you can see here in kind of two different spots. And again, I apologize for the small text, but it says you have selected Saturday, August 14th, 8 to 9:30 a.m. with a link to remove that selection. And then also in the option table below, we have a link to remove that option as well. So if a user loads up their time slot page again, they would see this kind of thing. They, one, see what they had selected, and two, see links that they can remove selections if they want. And kind of like I mentioned before, I had this page set up so that a user could select multiple times. So if this was like volunteering for events or something, then if I wanted to sign up 9:30 to 11, I could go do that here as well. Whereas if it's like move-in time slots, you probably only want them to pick up one. So kind of some dynamics on how this can be adjusted. So that's a bit about a demo of how all the sites works, and I'll dive in a little more on the design of everything on the back end. So a system generally is one that limits the number of times an option can be selected. We saw those options were like 8 to 9:30, 9:30 to 11. Those were what we call options in the system. And so the system limits how many times each one of those can be selected and claimed by a user. And then those options can be grouped into sections. And we saw on that form, the sections were specific days. So that kind of meets the top case in this table here, where it's move-in time slots. We have move-in days as the sections, and then the specific options are time blocks within that day. That's what we had just seen. But we can also implement this with different events or volunteer roles or things like that, where your sections aren't different days, but different events that students are signing up for, or different roles within an event. So if you're doing volunteering kind of thing, then you would have maybe a greeter and a tour guide, and then whatever other facilitator roles there, and users can sign up for whichever one they want to use. And so then our option on that side is also time blocks within that day, event, role, whatever the section is. And I kind of have an example of that here. We can see on the left is what we had seen before, where it's time options within a day. But on the right, we see it's time options within specific roles. I have a greeter role that's 8 to 9:30 a.m. with capacity of 5 people, and a tour guide role, 8 to 9:30 a.m. with capacity of 15 people. So maybe this is some of them where people are coming into a check-in table, but then also going off to get tours. So you have people signing up for different roles. And I should also mention here, those options can be distinct for each one. So like the greeter, maybe the greeter schedule is like, well, they sign up 8 to noon and then 1 to 5 or whatever for the greeter. And those are the two time options there. But the tour guide, it's a completely different schedule. Like that's all fine with how we've designed the system as well. You kind of define those sections or those options, and then what sections they're a part of, and go from there. So this is kind of how, like on the left is like our move-in time slot implementation, but we have used it for like event scheduling and that kind of stuff as well within our staff. So like I kind of said, it's a generic system tied with the mock form software. So yeah, there's the name of the software if anyone had missed that. that form software associates a unique identifier with every form. So every time you create a form, it has a numerical form ID that it associates with that, and that kind of drives the whole system. In the URL, we have the form ID in the URL as part of the query string, and so that kind of tells the system which page to load. And so whenever we have a new system, the URL is just slightly different with that different key in the end of it. And then we have database tables that store the sections and options for a form, as well as the form description and any selection limitations. So we had talked about sections and options, those days and dates and time ranges and stuff like that are all saved off in database tables, as is there's a little bit of a spot for a description of the form and of the process at the top of each page. That's all saved off in the database. And then the selection limitations are basically like how many options a user can select. So if a user can select only one option for like a move-in time slot kind of implementation, you can set it up that way. Or if it's like volunteering at an event, well, we don't care, and set the user limitation to 999. Like select as many as you want, it'll be fine. But then also how many users can select the same option. So like for move-in time slots, we're controlling move-ins at a given time for a given hall, and so we'd want that set to however many we want there. Or if we're doing like event volunteering or something, well, we know how many staff members we want at that event at a given time, so that's our capacity for that. We then have the web pages to display that information for users to select, so we kind of showed what those are going through. The form submission saves a unique identifier for each selected option, so our table that defines maybe the 8 to 9 a.m. for Saturday option has a key ID of 15. Well, then the form submission saves option 14 or option, whatever I said, 14, 15, saves with the selection, and that way we know this person had marked off this option, so we know which ones have been claimed and how many people have claimed each option. And then we use database views and reports to kind of see what users had selected, give staff rosters of everything that had happened with the system, that kind of thing. So again, this maybe is a little bit more top level and maybe makes more sense to IT folk on how everything is tied together. But generally, that's how our system is put together. Specifically for move-in time slots, we had a couple layers on top of that. I wanted to give y'all a little bit of a reflection on those. So we had one web page that users would go to that figures out the correct form for them. So we were able to mark it housing.gtu.edu/timeslot, and then that page figures out which hall you were a part of and then which hall you needed to see. But it also bounced people off to our main housing site if they didn't have an application yet, or if they were just a random community member or anything like that. It would send them there. And the first couple of years, not all of our halls were using time slots. So we were sending some users off to just like our normal move-in page, like, hey, you don't need a time slot, so we're going to send you over to this other site. But that means we can market one URL for everyone, even though on the back end we're using several different URLs. We only have to tell people housing/time slot, you're good to go. We create a separate form for each hall that we have. So one limitation that Eric will talk about is our granularity. So you basically need a new form for every level of granularity that you have. We're limiting the moving capacity by hall, so not by floor or wing or anything like that, but by hall. And since we have 20 halls, that means we need 20 forms. If we were wanting to do it by floor, then we would need one form for every floor that we have, which could easily get cumbersome in our implementation. But using it by hall has worked for us so far. So we created 20 online forms for the users to go through and select from their halls. And then we define capacities based on our expected availability to serve students. So I believe we basically mapped out the 8 or 9 days of move-in that we expected students to show up and figured out, well, the 500 people for this hall, if we had 6 or 7 options per day across 8 or 9 days, how many people would need to move in per section to get in? And that's kind of how we governed how many people should move into the hall at any given 90-minute block. And then, yeah, for fall 20, we had 90-minute move-in time slots, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., with 12:30 to 1:30 was a lunch break for our staff. And those ran Saturday 8/8 to Monday 8/24. And I believe we kind of made a main focus on the first half of that, the first week of that, as our bigger like move-in push, where we had more staff available to help them move in, but still wanted to provide options all the way up until when classes started for anyone that was coming later. That's one thing we've done over the years is maybe we have a focused move-in weekend or move-in time period, but we still provide time slot options for the other days that students could come in before classes. It could kind of be like a, I'm not coming during move-in, but I am coming early to capture that and not be reaching out to students that are like, hey, you haven't picked a time slot, and then go, oh yeah, because I'm not moving in those days, I'm moving in over here. So it's a way for us to catch that compliance kind of thing. Here's also a quick graph of our time slot data, and I believe this was from right at the end of our process from last year. So this shows the number of people moving in across campus for fall 20. So when you see we peaks around 800 to 900 up to 1,000, but definitely people preferring Saturday and Sunday. And then a bit of a dip down as we get to a midweek, and then ramp back up again for another Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then another dip down. And I will say visible across all of our entire campus across 20 halls, and this is per day, so that's really 1,000 people across 20 halls is maybe a little bit less than what that would look like all into one area. So that was it on the design. We'll talk about some implementation a little bit for fall 20 as well, or for move-in time slots anyway. So there's a bit of auditing that needs to be done with how we have this process for move-in time slots. The system is tied to resident booking only on form completion. So I kind of talked about at the start, we have one page that we market that users can go to. That page figures out what hall someone's a part of and sends them off to their appropriate form. But that only happens when the user completes the form, and then nothing else is tied to our resident booking in our current implementation, which then means we need to do daily audits of the data to make sure that all of the data all the time slot selections are correct and valid and that we actually need them. So those daily audits include deleting selections for those that cancel their contract. So if you cancel your contract, your booking's deleted, you're no longer coming to Texas Tech, you no longer need a time slot. So we're gonna go delete that for you. We also delete selections for community advisors and other staff that wouldn't, or other student groups that wouldn't need time slots. So some of that would be like, certainly CAs, but in prior years, we've had like our marching band moves in at a different time through a different process than time slots, so they don't need their selections. Any of our summer residents that might be moving into their fall spaces early because their fall spaces are open and ready and they might as well move out and move straight into it instead of going home for a couple weeks. Like we may delete their time slot selections as well because they're just going to transition right over as well. So things like that where we'll identify those populations beforehand and delete their time slot selections and kind of follow up with them and be like, hey, you picked this, you didn't really need it, so we freed it up for someone else. We also attempt to change time slot selections for people that had moved halls. So if you had signed up for one hall and picked your time slot, but then did a room change into a different hall before move-in, we'll try to move that selection for you if it's available. There is the risk, though, that, well, I signed up for the 8 to 9 a.m. slot for this hall, but now I'm over here. Well, that slot's already booked up for that hall. We'll send them an email saying, hey, your previously selected slot for your new hall isn't available, so here, go on and pick a new option for you. So that's maybe hard to police and stuff like that, and maybe creates a little bit of a touch point for them of them maybe not liking the very thing had changed, but it's kind of the best we can do. And we don't want to, especially in times of COVID, we don't want to overfill the slots whenever they come up. We also do daily follow-ups with students who have not yet received the time slot selection email. So if someone got their first booking after the last time we sent emails out, we'll send them the new email like, hey, go select a time slot, that kind of thing. We also did weekly follow-ups with residents that have not yet completed the process. So kind of catching up with non-compliant people on a weekly basis, like, well, they've gotten the emails before and it's been longer than 7 days or whatever, let's reach out to them again just to be like, hey, you all need to sign up for a time slot, that kind of thing. I see a question in chat. How do you deal with people who fail to sign up for a time or show up at another time other than what they signed up for. During this process, we do those weekly non-compliant email, or I call them non-compliant. That might be harsher language than what we actually use. But we do those weekly emails following up with people to try to get them into it. I believe on move-in days, the general consensus we've had is that we will still serve them, but only after the people that filled out time slots. So like, well, yeah, we'll still move you in, but we need to serve all of these people that had signed up and were here at the correct time slot. We'll get all of them in first, and then we'll move over to you. I don't think that's really caused that many issues with staff in the halls and with parents, but that's kind of how we done. I will say that with our we usually get around 80 to 90% adoption of our time slotting system, where 80 to 90% of the people that need time slots have them at move-in. So we kind of have a relatively low percentage of people that don't have time slots at move-in with our repetitive follow-ups with people. So hopefully that answers that question there.
People tend to actually do what they say they're going to do. So it really hasn't been a huge issue. If they sign up for a 10 o'clock time slot, they tend to show up at 10 o'clock. So it's just, there's not really that many people that just kind of go rogue. So we're able to handle the number of people that come. And as Ben was saying, like, they get handled after the people that showed up at the correct time. So that's not everybody for the day. It's not like you show up at 10 in the morning and we're going to serve you at 5 in the afternoon. It's like within that hour, right? So people that showed up at 10 and are supposed to be there at 10 get served first, and then we'll fit you in.
Yeah, thanks for that clarifying, Eric. Kind of along those lines, and a lot of that stuff, you know, Eric and I work in IT, and a lot of, at least for me, a lot of the processes I build like this and manage, I know a lot about how they're built and how we manage the data leading up to move-in, but maybe have less of an idea of how everything works on move-in day and stuff. So I reached out to our ResLife team, and Marie-Louise Bridgman, one of our RLCs, reached out with some information on what their perspective was from ResLife and kind of the benefits and challenges they saw from it. So one of those, or some of those, being that it allowed staff to anticipate busy times. So if you remember back a couple of slides ago from that graph, we saw a big dip down, like midweek. Tuesday, Wednesday was always like the lowest day. So they know that, hey, we're having a less of a buzz there, so we don't have to staff as many people to make that happen. But also, even the halls get delivered rosters that show the breakdown in the 90-minute time blocks. Like, okay, well, 3 to 4 or whatever, we don't have a whole lot here, so I know I can give my staff a break, not staff as many people, that kind of thing. It also means they only need to prepare keys and move-in packets and all that kind of stuff for the current slots, you know, the current day of things, or the next, tomorrow and the day after, that kind of thing. You don't have to prepare all the things all at once to make sure to see it. You don't really know who's coming in and when, that kind of stuff. You only kind of prepare the data that's most relevant for the time that you're in. And yeah, if you do have walkouts, then you'll kind of need to go and do that in ad hoc, but at least the ones that you know are going to show up, you can have those ready. Rosters of students that and their move-in times also allowed staff to call those and reach out to them that but hadn't showed up yet. So, hey, you had signed up for 9 to 10, it's now noon, or you coming today? Did you hit some traffic? What's going on there? Anything we can help you with, that kind of thing. Or even end of the day, like, hey, we're wrapping up our resources for the day. Is there anything that we can do for y'all, or do you have an anticipated arrival time, that kind of thing? Or even, here's what our after-hours move-in process might look like, if it exists. Kind of a tricky bit there was students seem to want to change their time slots on the day as they hit traffic or travel challenges coming to campus. But we had used hard cutoff dates to provide rosters to hall staff. So that's kind of one where we don't really know how best you can navigate that process between needing to give staff a definite list of here's who's coming on a given day, but also having cutoffs for students to be more adaptive and change their selections as needed. I believe for our move-in process for fall, because we had things spread out over like a 2-week period, the time slots for one day would close off at 5 o'clock on the day before or something like that. And so we maybe could have done better communication to students, say, hey, if you need to change your slot, you won't be able to pick the same day because it would have closed off at 5 p.m. the prior. So here's how you could communicate with staff, or things like that. But, you know, it's tricky bits there. How do you balance being the most open and accessible for your students versus needing the hard data for your staff to be prepared and that kind of thing. And then the halls, kind of the same thing. The halls did see students show up before move-in started or over lunch break. So if our move-in started at 8, students were maybe wind up at 7:30 wanting to move in, or we did have that lunch break built into our system this time, and people were maybe showing up during that lunch break trying to move in. Not really sure how you could solve those too much. The being there before move-in, I feel like you're just going to keep chasing that. If you say, well, move-in will start at 7, well, then people show up at 6:30 and that kind of thing. So maybe the solution to that is just be ready earlier than what you say you're going to be for anyone that does show up. Is maybe a solution there. The lunch break thing we have in the past done where we had time slots over a lunch break and just had kind of reduced capacity. So maybe we can do like, well, half the staff take lunch 11 to 12, the other half 12 to 1, and kind of roll through it like that. But then you're giving students the best option, but maybe hurting your staff a little bit. So those are just challenges that you go back and forth with. But that's kind of our design of the system and implementations, and I'll let Eric from here talk about the reflections and limitations that we've seen in this system.
All right. So starting off here, things that we've learned. We've done this for several years, and we've improved it every year and with what we've learned. And one thing that we took a look at was we considered how far away people were when they were coming to tech, how many people were traveling from what distances, and then what the people traveling the farthest tended to select. So you can see on this slide, you have 3 slots that are highlighted, and the people that are coming from the farthest away tended to select from 10 to 10:50, and from 4:50 to 4:50, and from 5 to 5:50. So they tended to be more towards the end of the day generally. So we took that and we thought, well, okay, well maybe we should have more time slots later in the day for those people who are coming from farther away. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Ben. So and that can be a difficult challenge to tackle. Like, how do you offer slides later in the day? So we actually tried one year where we had a big time slot that was basically like after 5 to midnight, like you could show up anytime. The problem with offering a time slot like that is that really people just show up at the beginning of it. So basically at 5 we had our staff that mostly going home or had a reduced level of staff and services for sure, and then all of a sudden all these people started showing up. They don't like self spread out throughout the time period. They all just show up at 5. So that was a problem. So we offered more time slots that were specific, just like throughout the day. We just offered more of them so that you had time to sign up for the hour time slots later in the day. But then you run into the services problem of like, well, are we just going to have a never-ending move-in? Like, and so basically we have landed on about 6 o'clock. We cut it off this last fall, and we offered the slots up to that point. So that's kind of our compromise there. With that particular problem, but that's kind of a difficult one to handle, especially when people are having to come from so far away. So they really need to have the slots that fit their schedule. Okay. So, and I think Ben mentioned earlier, a problem with our particular implementation of the system, it's not necessarily a problem that would plague other implementations, but with ours and the way we built it, we have a granularity issue where every level of granularity we add adds its exponential growth of complication, right? So we have a form for each building right now, but then if we say, well, we want to do it by floors, well, then we'd have to have a form for every floor, and it just would get out of control and become unmanageable with the way that we have implemented this system. So that's a problem that our particular implementation has. Now, a problem that isn't necessarily our implementation, but might be in general, is the problem of a student signs up for building A, they do a room change to building B before move-in. Well, now they have a time slot for building A, but not for building B. And we do audits where we detect that, and we try to move that time slot over to the other building. And that means that the buildings have to have the same time slots in order to move that across. We run into issues of, well, the time slot's full in the other building and things like that, and we have to handle that on a case-by-case basis. But we try to just move the slot over and not have to go back and forth with the student. So the slots have to be unilateral. They have to be the same across all the buildings. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Ben. So we use a software called Mercury here to do our occupancy management. And in the new version of their software that we'll be getting later this year, they actually built in a time slotting system into their software. And it has some benefits over ours and some setbacks over ours. So one thing that it has that would be a big help is it does have that granularity. So as you can see here, it says you can indicate 10 people per floor can be in a particular time slot, or 10 people per building, or you could allow 50 people per building per time slot. But at the same time, you could say only 10 people per floor and 1 person per suite. So you can really add a lot more rules and granularity to this system with that. And this system isn't just like ours. It doesn't necessarily have to be move in, move out. It could be used for other things as well. But some setbacks to this system currently, and it's a brand new feature they have that we'll be testing out once we get the software. One setback it has over ours is it does delete time slots if they do a room change. So whereas ours, we still see the time slot and we see that it doesn't match where they are now, and then we can act accordingly and move that time slot over or contact the student or whatever we need to do. But with the current way that this is implemented in Mercury, the time slot just gets deleted if they do a room change. So then our process would have to change where we would have to basically, they'd be lumped in with all the people who haven't, where's my light? They'd be lumped in with the people who haven't done time slots at all. So we would have to contact them just like we contact those people and say, hey, you need to come select a time slot. And maybe there's a way that we could figure out, like, they actually did it before, so maybe they have a little bit different messaging when we talk to them. But that's something that if we implement this, we would have to adjust the way that we do that. And another setback in this is that selections are currently tied to bookings in the Mercury 4 time slot system. So with our current implementation, you have to be a student. You have to have a university ID to use our current time slot system. But in this system, you'd actually have to have a booking. So it could be used for time slotting things besides move in and things like that, but they would have to have a booking. And that isn't necessarily going to stay. That could be improved upon. They're taking feedback. This is a new feature, so it could change in the future. But that's something we will have to keep in mind when considering this. And another big benefit of using this component of the software we already use is that our staff uses this software all the time for occupancy management, bookings, billing, all that kind of stuff. So this is one thing that they could be trained on, even if they're not IT people. They could be trained to implement these time slots and manage these time slots in the Mercury system. Whereas the way that we've implemented it is a very IT-based way. Like, we have a lot of custom code. We've written a lot of PHP. We build the forms, the online forms. So really only a couple of us essentially can manage the time slot system currently. Whereas with this component, a lot more people could be trained to manage it. So it'd be a lot easier to have more people working on this. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're asking for any feedback or questions you have. I see a few people have written. So if you want to use this to scan to go fill out a survey about the presentation, that'd be great. If anybody has any questions, just type it in chat. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Leanica. Did you use the Mercury 3 process or the Mercury 4 process? Because they kind of built something in Mercury 3 using the templates and things like that. But we didn't try that because we already had something in place we were doing. But we're definitely going to be looking at the Mercury 4 time slot process that's actually built into the software from the beginning. Okay, use the Mercury 3 one. Yeah, I looked at that a little bit, but like as we said, we were actually already doing our own system when that came about, so we didn't look too much at that. But I definitely am going to be looking at the Mercury 4 one here in a few months. And then Dan says that A&M, they've been doing check-ins by appointment in their apartments, and for the first time this school year, they have included the res halls. Great way to help manage physical distancing during these COVID times. So this year is actually a little different. Like we've done time slots in the past. This year was a little bit different in that instead of having primarily a weekend and then a week of time slots, we actually spread it out, I think, over a month. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but yeah, we had multiple weekends this past fall to allow people to spread out more, and we reduced the number that could sign up for any slot as well, to spread it out a lot more. So that's something we did do this year, and we were able to adapt the system to that. Okay.
Yeah, I will kind of say another.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ben.
I will kind of say another minor limitation of this that I hadn't really thought of. It's not really related to move-in, but for the time slotting system we made in general is the process doesn't work very well for just rolling open scheduling of appointments. So like if you're wanting to do like appointment scheduling for people to visit an office, it kind of breaks down there because you have to define all of the days and times as sections and options in the database table. Then basically every combination of day and time that you want students to sign up for, you have to define and are all going to be listed on that site, which kind of means that like if you want Monday to Friday and 10 different blocks within those days, then you have quickly 50 objects that need to be listed on that page in their own sections, and that's just for 1 week. So if you're trying to do a whole month or a whole semester, the page just wouldn't be usable. It would just scroll forever. And I mean, that's just our current implementation of it. We can make edits to make something like that more viable. But just from our current implementation, that kind of thing, I've been like, people have asked about that kind of solution. I'm like, it wouldn't work super great with what the system is right now. So just something else to kind of keep in mind a little bit.
Okay. Well, I guess our moderator can wrap up the presentation here.
Well,
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Ben, for your great presentation and a lot of great insight into the moving process and how to time slot that and kind of best practices moving forward. And thanks for all the participants for chiming in as well. Please, as a reminder, to do the survey that is posted to help us out in future presentations and to give Dan and Ben some good feedback. So thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you in future sessions.
Thank you, everyone.